Andrew Tate finds elderly man. Stranded on the side of the road, what happens next will blow your mind. In a twist of fate that proves truth is often stranger than fiction, Andrew Tate finds himself in an extraordinary situation when he stumbles upon an elderly man stranded on the side of the road. What unfolds next is nothing short of breathtaking, a story of courage, compassion, and jaw-dropping surprises. You won't believe the chain of events that follow, leaving everyone, including Andrew, completely astonished. It was a picture-perfect afternoon, the kind of day that lures you into a false sense of calm. Andrew Tate, behind the wheel of his sleek black Bugatti, was enjoying the open road, away from the usual noise and distractions of his fast-paced life. The countryside stretched endlessly on either side, golden fields shimmering under the late afternoon sun. With every mile, the roar of the engine and the endless horizon seemed to offer a rare moment of solitude. But just as he rounded a bend, something caught his attention. Up ahead, on the shoulder of the road, sat an elderly man, his figure hunched and motionless. His disheveled gray hair glinted in the sunlight, and beside him lay a battered suitcase. Andrew's first thought was that someone else would surely stop and help. But as he approached, he noticed something that made him reconsider. The man wasn't waving for help or signaling in any way. He just sat there, his head bowed, like someone who had given up entirely. Slowing down, Andrew pulled his car to the side and stepped out. His signature confidence was evident in the way he carried himself, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. He wasn't sure what to expect, but something about the scene didn't sit right. As he approached, the man looked up, his face weathered and lined with age. His eyes carried a heaviness that spoke of hardship. "Hey there!" Andrew called out, his voice firm yet kind. "You okay? Need a hand?" The man's lips parted in a faint smile, but his voice trembled as he spoke. "I didn't think anyone would stop." Andrew crouched down to meet his gaze. "Well, I'm here now. What's going on? Why are you out here all alone?" The man took a deep breath, as though gathering the strength to answer. "My car broke down miles back. I've been walking, but I couldn't go any further. I don't have a phone, and I didn't think anyone would bother with an old man like me." Andrew tilted his head, studying him. There was something sincere, almost vulnerable, about the way the man spoke. He glanced at the suitcase, noticing how battered it looked, like it had seen decades of wear. "Where were you headed?" Andrew asked. "To a place not far from here," the man replied. "At least, it's not far by car. But it's important, very important, that I get there." Andrew hesitated for a moment. He had places to be, things to do. But something about the man's tone and the quiet urgency in his voice struck a chord. "All right," Andrew said finally. "Get in. Let's get you where you need to go." The man's face lit up with a gratitude that Andrew wasn't expecting. He stood slowly, leaning heavily on a cane that Andrew hadn't noticed before. Andrew helped him with the suitcase, placing it carefully in the trunk. As they settled into the car, Andrew couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a decision that would lead to something far bigger than he anticipated. As the car started and they pulled back onto the road, Andrew glanced over at his passenger. "So you've got to tell me, what's so important that you're out here risking heat stroke in the middle of nowhere?" The man chuckled softly, a sound tinged with both amusement and sadness. "It's a long story," he said, "but since you asked." And just like that, the conversation began. The man introduced himself as Arthur, a retired historian who had spent his life studying ancient civilizations and their secrets. At first, Andrew listened out of politeness, nodding at the right moments. But as Arthur continued, his story took an unexpected turn. Arthur explained that he was on his way to deliver an artifact he had been entrusted with decades ago. It wasn't just any artifact, he said, but something of immense historical and cultural significance. It's a piece of a puzzle, Arthur said, his voice growing steadier. One that historians like me have been piecing together for centuries. If it falls into the wrong hands... He trailed off, his expression darkening. Andrew raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued despite himself. You're saying someone might try to stop you? Arthur nodded gravely. They already have. That's why my car broke down. It wasn't an accident. Andrew tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his instincts kicking in. The idea sounded far-fetched, almost like something out of a movie, but the sincerity in Arthur's voice made it hard to dismiss. All right, Andrew said, his voice calm but firm. If someone's after you, they're going to have to get through me first. Arthur looked at Andrew with a mixture of relief and admiration. I can't thank you enough, he said, but you should know, this is just the beginning. As the miles sped by, the road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly into the unknown, and Andrew couldn't shake the feeling that he was driving straight into the heart of an adventure he hadn't signed up for. The atmosphere inside the car shifted as Arthur continued to recount the story of the artifact. His words painted vivid images of ancient civilizations, lost temples, and a secret that had been guarded for centuries. Andrew listened intently, his usual skepticism softening as the details unfolded. It wasn't just the content of Arthur's story that gripped him. It was the weight in his voice, the deep conviction that this artifact was more than just an object. It was a key to something monumental. The artifact, Arthur explained, is part of a larger set. When combined, these pieces reveal something that could change the way we understand our past, and maybe even our future. It's why there are those who will stop at nothing to possess it. Andrew frowned, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. You're telling me people are willing to kill over this thing? Arthur nodded solemnly. It wouldn't be the first time. The weight of the statement hung in the air as Andrew glanced in the rearview mirror. At first, it was nothing more than a reflex, a habit from years of being vigilant. But as his eyes flicked to the mirror again, he noticed something that made his stomach tighten, a black SUV trailing them at a steady distance. Its tinted windows offered no clues, but its presence felt deliberate. Arthur, Andrew said, his tone measured, you weren't kidding about people being after you. That SUV behind us, has it been following you? Arthur turned slightly, his face clouding as he caught sight of the vehicle. It was there when my car broke down, he admitted. I didn't think they'd still be tracking me. Andrew's mind raced. He wasn't one to panic, but the stakes had suddenly become very real. All right, he said, his voice calm but firm. Let's see what they want. He pressed lightly on the accelerator, increasing the speed of the car. The SUV mirrored his action, closing the distance slightly. Andrew's jaw tightened. It was clear now that this wasn't a coincidence. Whoever was driving that SUV wasn't just on the same road, they were hunting. Arthur looked at him with a mixture of fear and determination. I told you this wouldn't be simple, he said. If they catch us, they'll take the artifact. And if that happens, everything we've worked for will be lost. Andrew shot him a quick glance. Relax, old man. Nobody's catching us. The confidence in his voice was unmistakable, and Arthur seemed to draw strength from it. Andrew shifted gears, the Bugatti responding instantly as it surged forward. The SUV matched his speed, its engine roaring as it closed the gap. Andrew's mind worked quickly, assessing the terrain. The road ahead was winding, with sharp curves and steep embankments. It wasn't ideal for a chase, but it wasn't impossible either. Hold on, Andrew said, gripping the wheel tightly. This is going to get interesting. He pushed the car harder, the tires squealing as they rounded a tight bend. The SUV struggled to keep up, but its driver was skilled, maintaining a relentless pursuit. Andrew's adrenaline surged, his focus narrowing to the road ahead and the black vehicle in the mirror. "Why don't we just call the cops?" Arthur asked, gripping the door handle as the car swerved around another curve. Andrew smirked, his usual bravado shining through. "Cops would slow us down. Trust me, I've got this." The chase intensified as the road straightened, giving Andrew an opportunity to put some distance between them. He glanced at the GPS, noting a turnoff ahead that led to a series of back roads. It was a risk. Those roads were narrow and unpredictable, but it might be their only chance to lose the SUV. "Arthur, you might want to brace yourself," Andrew warned. Before Arthur could respond, Andrew veered sharply onto the turnoff, the car jolting as it hit the uneven pavement. The SUV hesitated for a moment before following, its tires kicking up gravel as it pursued them down the winding road. Trees loomed on either side, their branches forming a canopy that cast dappled shadows on the ground. Andrew pushed the car to its limits, navigating the twists and turns with precision. The SUV, though larger and less agile, stayed stubbornly on their tail. Andrew's mind raced as he considered his options. He needed to think fast, to outmaneuver their pursuers before the narrow road worked against them. Then up ahead, he spotted it, a narrow bridge spanning a shallow ravine. The bridge was old and rickety, barely wide enough for a single vehicle. Andrew's lips curled into a determined smile. "Perfect," he muttered. "Perfect," Arthur echoed, his voice tinged with panic. "What are you planning?" Andrew didn't answer. Instead, he gunned the engine, the Bugatti roaring as it raced toward the bridge. The SUV, undeterred, followed. As they reached the bridge, Andrew timed his move perfectly. Just as they crossed, he slammed on the brakes and spun the car into a sharp turn, blocking the narrow path behind them. The SUV skidded to a halt, its driver clearly realizing they were at an impasse. For a moment there was silence, the two vehicles facing off like predators sizing each other up. Then, the SUV's engine revved, and it started to back away, retreating down the road. Andrew let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his hands still gripping the wheel. Arthur looked at him, his face a mixture of awe and relief. "I don't know how you did that," he said, "but I owe you my life." Andrew shrugged, his trademark smirk returning. Just another day at the office. But as he turned the car back onto the road, his expression grew serious. Whoever was after Arthur, and the artifact, wasn't going to give up so easily. This was far from over. The temporary respite after losing the SUV allowed Andrew and Arthur to regroup, but tension still lingered in the air. Arthur clutched his suitcase as though it contained his very soul, his knuckles white against the worn leather handle. Andrew's mind churned with possibilities, scanning the road ahead and the rearview mirror in turns. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the countryside. Despite the peaceful surroundings, the atmosphere inside the car was anything but. "So," Andrew said, breaking the silence, "who are these people really? They don't look like your average collectors." Arthur sighed heavily, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "They're not. They're part of a shadow organization, individuals who thrive on acquiring and hoarding knowledge that could benefit humanity, all for their own power. The artifact in that suitcase isn't just history, it's a map to something greater." Andrew raised an eyebrow, but kept his focus on driving. "A map? To what?" Arthur hesitated before answering, his voice low and cautious. "To an ancient vault, a place rumored to contain blueprints of technology far ahead of our time. Whoever controls what's inside would hold an unimaginable advantage over the rest of the world." Andrew let out a low whistle, more out of habit than disbelief. And you've been carrying this thing around like it's a pair of socks? I didn't have a choice, Arthur replied, his voice tinged with regret. I've spent my life protecting it, moving it from place to place. I thought I was careful, but they found me. Andrew tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his instincts as a fighter kicking in. Well, they're not going to get their hands on it, not while I'm around. The road narrowed again, this time cutting through a dense forest. The trees grew taller and closer, their branches arching overhead to form a natural tunnel. The dappled sunlight flickered across the windshield, creating an almost hypnotic effect. For a brief moment, Andrew felt a strange sense of calm. But that peace was shattered when the unmistakable sound of an engine roared in the distance. "They're back," Arthur said, his voice tight with fear. Andrew glanced in the rearview mirror. The black SUV had reappeared, its headlights glaring like predatory eyes. A second vehicle joined it, an equally menacing sedan, and together they accelerated toward the Bugatti. Andrew's pulse quickened, his mind racing. "Looks like they brought backup." Arthur looked at him, his expression a mixture of desperation and trust. "Can we outrun them?" Andrew grinned, his confidence as unshakable as ever. "Outrunning them is plan A. If that doesn't work, we'll make a plan B." He slammed on the accelerator, the Bugatti leaping forward like a beast unleashed. The forest blurred around them as Andrew weaved through the narrow road, his hands steady on the wheel. The pursuers gave chase, their engines roaring in unison. The stakes were higher now, the danger palpable. The first sharp turn came up fast, but Andrew navigated it with surgical precision. The pursuers struggled to keep up, their tires screeching as they skidded around the bend. Andrew smirked, but his triumph was short-lived. Up ahead, the road forked into two paths, both equally narrow and treacherous. "Left or right?" Arthur asked, his voice edged with panic. Andrew didn't hesitate. "Left. Always go left." He veered sharply, the Bugatti tilting slightly as it took the turn at high speed. The pursuers split up, one car following them while the other took the right fork. Andrew cursed under his breath. "These guys are more coordinated than I thought." The road ahead was rough. The pavement cracked and uneven. It climbed steeply, leading to a ridge that overlooked a vast valley. Andrew pushed the car harder, but the black SUV stayed on their tail, inching closer with every second. "Time for Plan B," Andrew muttered, his mind racing for options. Arthur looked at him, confused. "What's Plan B?" Andrew grinned. "Improvise." Spotting a narrow dirt path that veered off the main road, Andrew made a split-second decision. He yanked the wheel to the side, the Bugatti skidding onto the path in a cloud of dust and gravel. The SUV followed, its bulk making it harder to navigate the tight turns. The path wound down toward the valley, its surface uneven and littered with rocks. "Hold on tight!" Andrew shouted as the car jolted over the rough terrain. The SUV struggled to keep up, its size working against it. Andrew used the Bugatti's superior handling to his advantage, swerving around obstacles with precision. The path grew narrower, forcing the SUV to slow down. Finally, Andrew spotted an opportunity, a sharp turn that led to a small bridge spanning a creek. "This is it," Andrew said, his eyes narrowing with determination. He sped toward the bridge, the car roaring as it cleared the gap and landed on the other side. The SUV hesitated, its driver unsure whether to risk the jump. Andrew didn't wait to find out. He gunned the engine, disappearing into the forest on the other side. As the path widened and smoothed out, Andrew slowed down, finally pulling the car to a stop. Arthur exhaled a shaky breath, his grip on the suitcase never loosening. "I can't believe we made it." Andrew leaned back in his seat, his adrenaline slowly subsiding. "Told you, nobody catches me." Arthur looked at him, his eyes filled with gratitude. You're more than I expected, Andrew. But we're not done yet. Andrew nodded, his expression serious. Let's finish this. The final stretch of their journey brought them to a secluded museum nestled at the edge of a cliff. The sun had set by the time they arrived, casting the landscape in deep purples and oranges. Andrew helped Arthur out of the car, his demeanor calm but alert. The museum's director, an old colleague of Arthur's, greeted them with relief and urgency. "You brought it," the director said, his eyes lighting up as Arthur handed him the suitcase. "Thank you." Arthur turned to Andrew, his expression somber. "This is where we part ways, my friend, but you've done more than I could have ever asked for." Andrew raised an eyebrow. "You sure you'll be safe here?" Arthur nodded. "This place is fortified. They won't get in. And if they try, well, we're prepared." Andrew hesitated, then extended his hand. Arthur shook it firmly, his gratitude evident. "You're a good man, Andrew. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Andrew smirked. "Don't worry, nobody does." As he walked back to his car, the weight of the day finally hit him. This wasn't how he'd planned to spend his afternoon, but as he drove off into the night, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of fulfillment. Sometimes, he thought, the detours in life lead to the most unforgettable destinations.